it be you and I? Could it be you and I? Could it be you and I? Could it be you and I?
Hello everyone, and welcome to another video from Signum Saddle Service. Today, I'd like to show you how you can fit the Western paddle to your horse. For this, I've brought the fitting system along, consisting of the measuring template and the matching adjustment key. And of course, the new Western paddle, so that I can show you how the whole thing works. We've been provided with a lovely quarter-horse mare from the Hacienda here in Spain, who's serving as our model today, so I can show you how to set the measuring template on the horse's back and then adjust the paddle accordingly to fit, so that everything fits well together afterwards and you can have a lot of fun riding with the paddle. In the first step, I'd like to show you how to place the measuring template on the horse to be able to set it correctly. We have here, very easily felt, the horse's shoulder. It's relatively hard, you can feel the bone here. And if you stroke further back over the back with your finger, you can clearly feel where the softer musculature begins here. And at this point, behind the shoulder blade is where we want to place the measuring template to take the horse's angle. And I'll start now, set much too narrow. Now you can see very clearly that there's a lot of space up here, and only the bottom corner is touching. And if it were set much too wide the other way around, you'd see the top corner pressing and space at the bottom. That means in both cases it wasn't sitting parallel. I'll set it narrower again and slowly press it down. And then you can clearly see that we're now in a position where the line inside the measuring template lies parallel behind the horse's shoulder. And thus the angle of the horse is taken here. And through that we can now transfer the horse's internal angle to the outside of the paddle. And thus the fork on the paddle can be adjusted to fit so that the paddle sits well on the horse afterwards. In the next step, I'd like to show you how we use the outside of the measuring template to set the angle of the paddle. And we have an edge here on the paddle where we can place the template very well. And we'll use this now as a tool and place the measuring template parallel at this point on one side here. And now you can see clearly here I've already preset the paddle too wide so that you can now directly recognize the difference well. And you see here now how a gap forms between the paddle and the template. That means now the paddle would be set wider than the template is. I'll simulate a fitting angle for a moment. We're now setting the template wider, and now we get to the point where the template on the outer edge on both sides lies nicely parallel to the contact surface. But we don't want to modify the template, rather we want to adjust the paddle to fit. And for that we have the 12mm wrench, which is already included in the fitting set. And now we can change this fork with its adjustment mechanism. We put the wrench on and turn the wrench inwards. Very important, the wrench must be fully seated so that the screw here doesn't get damaged in case you should accidentally slip. So please adjust the screw exactly so that I can put the wrench on properly. And then we now turn the wrench inwards. So from the outside in, we turn the wrench into the paddle. And by doing that, we also adjust the contact surfaces inwards. Exactly the other way around, we turn the wrench out of the paddle and thereby open the paddle outwards. So actually quite logical. And now I'll set this here, several small quarter turns tighter. And now with the same setting of the template, you see how the area here on the outside slowly closes. It's still a bit too wide. Let's do 2 more turns, smaller. So now you can clearly see that there's a little bit of air here, a little bit of air there. That means we're achieving parallelism between the contact surface and the template. And in this state, we'll now also place the paddle onto the horse once. So now we've preset the paddle and can now look again on the horse to see how the paddle lies here. But precisely through the transfer of the measuring template, we now have a parallel contact surface of the fork in the area behind the shoulder, where the pressure of the paddle should then also come to rest evenly. In the final step, we're now checking once more how the paddle actually comes to rest on the horse. Because the back shape of every horse is of course different. But due to the flexibility of the paddle, we don't have to worry about a bridge forming, so that the paddle only rests at the front and back and doesn't bear weight in the middle, since the paddle will conform even more to the horse's back through the rider's pressure. But first, of course, we have to pay attention to the spinal clearance. That means we check here in the front, above the adjustment mechanism area, right here where the fork is, if there's enough spinal clearance so that there's no contact between the bone and the paddle. But please keep in mind, we'll be adding an extra pad under the paddle later so that we raise the whole thing upwards a bit more in parallel. The second thing is we look at whether it sits relatively stable. Does the whole thing feel wobbly, meaning it rolls back and forth? We can set the paddle a bit narrower so it sits higher in front and gains more stability. And conversely, if I feel that the paddle is sitting very high in front and sloping downwards towards the back, we can set it a bit wider so that it comes down just a little bit lower. So the pre-adjustment with the measuring template is a rough guide that doesn't have to be followed 100%, but then we can adjust the paddle a bit smaller, meaning a bit narrower or a bit wider as needed, to account for the horse's specific build. If I have a back that slopes slightly to the back or to the front, or the paddle sits a bit too low in front and therefore rests heavily in the middle and is generally a bit tippy, you can experiment a little bit more with that. Always remember, just set it a bit wider or back to the original starting position. No harm can come from doing that. Just to see exactly what happens with the paddle on the horse's back if I adjust the paddle just a tiny bit wider or narrower, regardless of the measurement of the angle from the measuring template. Now let's take a look at the paddle from underneath. And you can see here on the right and left, two prepared Velcro strips. These are there to Velcro our half pads underneath the paddle. The idea behind it is the possibility of creating increased spinal clearance. Western saddles, unlike English saddles, do not have thick padding to the right and left of the spine, but are generally made more evenly rounded. This results in less spinal clearance than is common with a dressage saddle or a jumping saddle, for example. And that's why for horses that have a relatively round back, we might not need such pads because the spine is already so embedded in the musculature. But if I have a horse where the spine might stick out of the back a bit or has a generally higher wither, we create a contact surface here on the right and left very evenly with the felt pad and leave the spine in the middle completely free. We can theoretically combine this with any pad. That means you can continue to use your normal pad like the one you use for a Western saddle and use these pads on top of that to achieve even more spinal clearance. You can then combine it with a much thinner pad, for example, because there's already some padding provided here. Or if necessary, you can use a thicker pad or a sheepskin pad. It's entirely up to you to decide what makes the most sense for your horses. The idea behind this is simply to create a second even contact surface that provides true spinal clearance in the middle. And so I'll just go ahead and put the gently paddle onto the horse, making sure to bring a pad with you. The pad already has a certain thickness to it, and people often think that if something is placed underneath, I'd have to make the paddle wider. But as you can see, this pad has a uniform thickness from the front to the back. That means this material thickness isn't just at the front, but also at the back. And so you get a kind of parallel shift upwards at the front, middle, and back. That's why you don't usually need to adjust the paddle wider just because you're putting an extra pad underneath it. Now let's put the paddle on the horse again on top of that. and I get a very similar fit with the pads, except that I naturally have a certain overall elevation above the horse, which is intended to keep the spine free. And you can then experiment yourself with the pad, the paddle, and the additional half pads made of our felt material to achieve spinal clearance or some additional cushioning. So now we've looked at all the different steps. We've used the fitting system, adjusted the template to the horse, transferred the angle of the template to the paddle, placed the paddle on the horse, and checked if any fine-tuning was needed. Then we attached our Velcro pads, our half saddle pads, and combined that with a thick saddle pad, once more, to check the fit again and the reasons for or against it. And now I'd say we're coming to the end. Thank you for your attention. I hope you'll have a lot of fun riding with the paddle. But overall, this product is perfectly suited for riding many different horses, or for adjusting the paddle over a long period with one horse from its youth to old age. I hope you enjoy using our products. We'll say bye. See you soon.